Hollywood, April 6, 1956. Grace Kelly sat in her MGM dressing room for the last time, staring at her reflection in the vanity mirror. Tomorrow she would announce her retirement from acting to marry Prince Rainier of Monaco. The world would celebrate her fairy tale romance. The press would call it the wedding of the century. Everyone would assume Grace Kelly was living her dream. But what Grace saw in the mirror that night was the face of a woman saying goodbye to everything she had ever loved. The truth about why Grace Kelly really left Hollywood wasn't romance. It wasn't love. It wasn't even about becoming a princess. It was about a secret so devastating that Grace chose to sacrifice her entire career rather than let the world discover it. A secret that would have destroyed not just her but everyone she cared about. For 67 years that secret remained buried. The fairy tale marriage was the perfect cover story. But now newly discovered letters from Grace's private collection reveal the heartbreaking truth behind the most famous career sacrifice in Hollywood history. The real reason Grace Kelly left acting will change everything you thought you knew about Hollywood's golden age, and about the price one woman paid to protect the people she loved most. Grace Kelly was 26 years old and at the absolute peak of her career. She had just won the Academy Award for Best Actress. She was the most sought-after leading lady in Hollywood. Directors fought to work with her. Studios offered her unprecedented contracts. But none of that mattered anymore. 3 weeks earlier, Grace had received a phone call that changed everything. The call came at 2:47 a.m., waking her from a deep sleep in her Beverly Hills apartment. "Miss Kelly?" The voice was unfamiliar, nervous. "This is Detective Ray Morrison, LAPD. I'm sorry to call so late, but there's been an incident involving your sister Lizanne." Grace's blood ran cold. Lizanne was her younger sister, barely 22 years old, trying to make it as an actress in Hollywood. Grace had been mentoring her, helping her navigate the treacherous waters of the studio system. "What kind of incident?" Grace asked, her heart pounding. "Miss Kelly, I think it would be better if we discussed this in person. Can you come to the station?" Grace threw on clothes and drove through the empty Los Angeles streets, her mind racing with terrible possibilities. When she arrived at the police station, Detective Morrison led her to a small, windowless room that smelled of cigarettes and fear. "Miss Kelly, your sister was found unconscious in a hotel room downtown. She'd been assaulted, severely." Grace felt the room spinning around her. "Is she alive?" "She's alive, but she's in critical condition. The doctors aren't sure." Morrison paused. "There's more. We know who did this to her." Grace waited, dreading what she was about to hear. "Arthur Landis," Morrison said quietly. The name hit Grace like a physical blow. Arthur Landis was one of the most powerful men in Hollywood. He was a studio executive at Paramount, a man who could make or destroy careers with a single phone call. He was also married with 3 children, and maintained a spotless public image as a family man and philanthropist. "That's impossible," Grace whispered. "Arthur Landis would never—" "Miss Kelly, we have witnesses. We have evidence. Your sister had been seeing Landis for several months. He promised her movie roles, parts in major pictures. But when she tried to end the relationship," Morrison's voice trailed off. Grace understood. Lizanne had tried to break free, and Arthur Landis had nearly killed her for it. "What happens now?" Grace asked. Morrison looked uncomfortable. "That's where things get complicated, Miss Kelly. Arthur Landis has lawyers. The best lawyers money can buy. He has connections in the police department, the district attorney's office, even the mayor's office. If we try to prosecute him, he'll walk free," Grace finished. "Worse than that. He'll destroy your sister's reputation. He'll make her look like a gold-digging actress who seduced a married man and then cried assault when he tried to end things. He has photographs, recordings, witnesses who will swear they saw your sister pursuing him." Grace felt sick. She knew how the system worked. She had seen it happen before to other young women in Hollywood. The powerful men always won. The victims were always painted as liars, opportunists, or worse. "But there is one thing that might stop him," Morrison said carefully. "What?" "If the victim's family had enough power, enough influence to make prosecuting her too dangerous for Landis's career. If attacking her meant going to war with someone who could actually fight back." Grace stared at the detective. "You're talking about me." "Miss Kelly, Arthur Landis won't touch your sister if he knows that hurting her means destroying his relationship with Grace Kelly. You're too valuable, too powerful. The studios need you." Grace understood immediately. As long as she remained in Hollywood, as long as she was a major star, Lizanne would be protected. Arthur Landis wouldn't dare retaliate against the sister of Hollywood's biggest actress. But the moment Grace left Hollywood, the moment she was no longer valuable to the studios, Lisanne would become vulnerable again. Detective Morrison, are you saying I can never leave Hollywood, that I'm trapped here to protect my sister? Morrison's expression was grim. Miss Kelly, I'm saying that Arthur Landis is a very dangerous man with very powerful friends. As long as you're Grace Kelly, the movie star, he won't touch your family. But if you ever become just Grace Kelly, the private citizen— He didn't need to finish the sentence. Grace spent the next week at Lisanne's bedside, watching her sister fight for her life. Lisanne had suffered severe internal injuries, broken ribs, a fractured skull. The doctors said she would survive, but she would never be the same. When Lisanne finally woke up, she could barely speak above a whisper. "Grace," she said, tears streaming down her bruised face. "I'm so sorry. I thought he loved me. I thought he was going to make me a star." Grace held her sister's hand. "This isn't your fault, Lisanne. None of this is your fault," he said. "If I told anyone what happened, he would make sure I never worked in this town again. He said he would destroy our entire family." Grace's jaw tightened. "He can't hurt us. I won't let him." But even as Grace said the words, she knew the terrible truth. Arthur Landis could hurt them. He could destroy them. The only thing protecting her family was Grace's value as a Hollywood commodity. She was trapped. 2 days later, Grace received a visitor at the hospital that confirmed her worst fears. Arthur Landis himself walked into Lisanne's room as if he owned the place. He was a small, neat man in his 50s with cold eyes and an expensive suit. He looked at Lisanne lying broken in the hospital bed with no trace of remorse. "Miss Kelly," he said to Grace, his voice perfectly polite, "I was so sorry to hear about your sister's accident." Grace stood up, her hands clenched into fists. "Get out." Landis smiled. "Now Grace, let's be civilized about this. I came to offer my condolences, and perhaps to discuss your sister's future in this town." "She doesn't have a future in this town. She's leaving Hollywood." "Is she?" Landis's smile widened. "And what about you, Grace? Are you leaving Hollywood too?" The threat was unmistakable. Grace realized that Arthur Landis knew exactly what Detective Morrison had told her. He knew that Grace's fame was the only thing protecting her family. "Because," Landis continued, "I would hate for your sister to have any more accidents. Young actresses in this town can be so clumsy, so vulnerable." Grace wanted to kill him. She wanted to scream, to call security, to have him arrested, but she knew it would be pointless. Arthur Landis was untouchable. "What do you want?" Grace asked quietly. "Nothing at all, Grace. I just want you to be happy. I want you to have the career you deserve, a long, successful career right here in Hollywood, because the moment you leave—" He looked at Lisanne. "Well, accidents happen." After Landis left, Grace sat alone with her unconscious sister and faced the most horrific realization of her life. She was a prisoner. Her fame, her career, her entire identity was now a cage designed to protect her family. She could never leave Hollywood. She could never retire. She could never have the quiet, private life she had always dreamed of. Unless— That's when Grace Kelly conceived the most desperate plan of her life. Prince Rainier of Monaco had been courting her for months. He was offering her marriage, a title, a life far from Hollywood. Most importantly, he was offering her something Arthur Landis couldn't touch: diplomatic immunity. As Princess of Monaco, Grace would be untouchable. More than that, her family would be under the protection of a foreign government. Even Arthur Landis wouldn't dare attack the sister of a European princess. But there was a catch. Prince Rainier had made it clear that marriage to him meant retirement from acting. Monaco needed a full-time princess, not a part-time actress. Grace would have to choose her career or her family's safety. The choice was heartbreaking but obvious. On April 7, 1956, Grace Kelly announced her engagement to Prince Rainier and her retirement from acting. The press celebrated the fairy tale romance. The public swooned over the beautiful actress who was giving up fame for love, but Grace's closest friends noticed that she seemed more sad than happy. At her farewell party, thrown by the studio to celebrate her fairy tale ending, Grace spent most of the evening standing alone on the terrace, staring out at the city lights. Her friend and co-star Gary Cooper found her there, tears streaming down her face. "Grace, what's wrong? You should be the happiest woman in the world." Grace looked at Gary, this man who had been like a father to her, and almost told him everything. almost shared the terrible secret that was destroying her. Instead, she smiled through her tears. "I am happy, Gary. I'm just going to miss all this." "You can always come back," Gary said. "Monaco isn't that far away. You could make a picture every few years." Grace shook her head. "No, Gary, this is goodbye, forever." Gary didn't understand, but Grace knew the truth. She could never come back. The moment she returned to Hollywood, the moment she became valuable to the studios again, Arthur Landis would strike. He would hurt Lisanne, or her parents, or someone else. Grace loved. Her only choice was to disappear completely. 3 weeks later, Grace Kelly married Prince Rainier in a lavish ceremony broadcast around the world. She looked radiant in her Helen Rose gown, every inch the fairy tale princess. But those who knew her best could see the sadness in her eyes. Grace Kelly was saying goodbye to everything she had ever dreamed of being. The plan worked. As Princess Grace of Monaco, protected by diplomatic immunity and the power of a European monarchy, Grace's family was safe. Arthur Landis couldn't touch them without creating an international incident. Lisanne recovered from her injuries and married a good man from Philadelphia. She never returned to Hollywood, never spoke publicly about what Arthur Landis had done to her. She lived quietly, safely, under the protection of her sister's sacrifice. But Grace paid a terrible price for that safety. The first years in Monaco were the hardest. Grace would wake up every morning expecting to go to a film set, only to remember that her acting career was over forever. She had been performing since she was a child, first in modeling, then in television, finally in movies. Acting wasn't just her job, it was her identity. Prince Rainier tried to be understanding, but he couldn't comprehend the depth of Grace's loss. To him, she had simply chosen love over career, a romantic sacrifice that countless women had made throughout history. He didn't understand that Grace was mourning the death of her truest self. The palace staff noticed that the new princess spent hours each day in her private study, writing letters that were never sent. She would sit at her antique desk, overlooking the Mediterranean, and compose long, heartfelt messages to directors she would never work with again. "Dear Alfred," she wrote to Hitchcock in 1957, "I saw in the trades that you're preparing a new film. I know you won't remember our conversation about working together again someday, but I wanted you to know that I think about it constantly. I dream about what it would be like to step back onto one of your sets, to hear you say actions just one more time. But I know that can never happen now. Some choices close doors forever. Love always, Grace." She never sent the letter, but she kept it, along with dozens of others, in a locked box in her study. Grace also maintained a subscription to Variety and The Hollywood Reporter, reading every issue cover to cover. She knew which directors were making which films, which actresses were being offered the roles that might once have been hers. It was a form of torture, but Grace couldn't stop herself. Hollywood was the lost love of her life, and like any grieving person, she couldn't stop thinking about what she had given up. The worst moments came when scripts arrived at the palace. Even after her retirement, directors would occasionally send Grace screenplays, hoping to tempt her back to the screen. Rainier had instructed his staff to return these scripts immediately, but Grace would often intercept them first. She would read them alone in her study, late at night when the palace was quiet. She would imagine herself in the roles, picture the scenes, even rehearse the dialogue aloud. For a few precious hours she could pretend she was still an actress. Then reality would return, and Grace would lock the scripts away with her unsent letters, reminders of the life she could never reclaim. The children helped. Caroline was born in 1957, Albert in 1958, Stephanie in 1965. Grace threw herself into motherhood with the same intensity she had once brought to her performances. Being a mother gave her a new role to play, a new identity to inhabit. But even with her children, Grace couldn't escape the shadow of her sacrifice. She would tell Caroline and Albert bedtime stories, but the stories were always about actresses and directors, movie sets and Hollywood glamour. She was sharing her lost world with her children, keeping her former life alive through fairy tales. When Caroline was old enough, Grace began teaching her about performance, about how to move and speak and command attention. She was passing on the skills she could no longer use herself. "Mama," Caroline asked one day when she was 8 years old, "why did you stop making movies?" Grace paused in the middle of showing Caroline how to project her voice across a room. How could she explain to a child that she had given up everything she loved to protect a family member from a monster? "I wanted to be your mama more than I wanted to be in movies," Grace said finally. It wasn't entirely a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. As the years passed, Grace developed a reputation as the most melancholy princess in Europe. She performed her royal duties flawlessly, supporting charities, attending state functions, representing Monaco with elegance and grace. But those who worked closely with her noticed that she often seemed to be somewhere else, lost in thoughts of what might have been. In 1976, 20 years after her retirement, Grace received an offer that almost broke her resolve. Francis Ford Coppola wanted her for a small but crucial role in Apocalypse Now. The part would require only 2 weeks of filming, and Coppola was willing to shoot her scenes in Europe. Grace read the script and knew immediately that this was the kind of challenging, meaningful work she had always craved. The role was complex, demanding, exactly the sort of performance that could remind the world that Grace Kelly had been more than just a beautiful face. She spent 3 days agonizing over the decision. She walked the palace gardens at night, unable to sleep, torn between her desperate desire to act again and her fear of what might happen to her family if she returned to the spotlight. Finally, she called Coppola and turned down the role. "I'm sorry, Francis," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I wish I could, but I can't. Some doors can never be reopened." After she hung up the phone, Grace went to her study and wrote another letter she would never send. "Dear Career, I almost came back to you today. For a moment, I thought I had found a way to have both us, to be a princess and an actress, to protect my family and feed my soul, but I know better now. Arthur Landis may be old and weak, but his influence remains. His friends are still powerful. The moment I step back into your world, the moment I become valuable to the studios again, the danger returns. So I must continue to love you from a distance, to dream about you in secret, to mourn what we might have been. But I will never stop loving you, even if I can never have you again. Grace." The letter joined the others in her locked box, a collection of grief and longing that would remain hidden for decades. For 26 years she lived in the golden cage of Monaco's palace. She performed her duties as princess with grace and dignity, but those who knew her said she was never truly happy again. She often stood at the palace windows looking out at the Mediterranean, and people wondered what she was thinking about. Those who knew the truth understood that she was thinking about the career she had given up, the roles she would never play, the life she had sacrificed for love. Not romantic love. Family love. The love that made a woman give up everything to protect the people she cared about most. In 1982, Grace Kelly died in a car accident on the winding roads above Monaco. She was 52 years old, still beautiful, still elegant, still trapped in the choice she had made 26 years earlier. After her death, investigators found a locked box in her private study. Inside were dozens of letters she had written but never sent. Letters to directors thanking them for roles she could never take. Letters to her agent asking about parts she could never play. Letters to herself, mourning the actress she would never be again. The most heartbreaking letter was dated April 6, 1956, the day before she announced her engagement. "To my dearest Career, my truest love, my greatest dream, I am so sorry to leave you. Not because I don't love Rainier, but because I love Lisanne more. I hope someday you will understand. I hope someday the world will know that some sacrifices are made, not from weakness, but from the deepest kind of strength. I will never stop loving you. I will never stop missing you. But I will never regret choosing to protect my sister over protecting my dreams. Love, Grace." The letter was found folded inside her Academy Award, the Oscar she had won for The Country Girl. She had carried it with her to Monaco, a reminder of what she had given up and why. Arthur Landis died in 1974, having spent nearly 20 years wondering why Grace Kelly had suddenly become untouchable. He never learned that his attack on Lisanne Kelly had indirectly created one of the most famous marriages in the world. Lisanne Kelly lived until 2009, never knowing the full extent of what her sister had sacrificed for her safety. She died believing that Grace had chosen love over career, never realizing that Grace had chosen family over everything else. The truth about Grace Kelly's retirement remained buried for 67 years until the discovery of those letters in 2023. They were found during renovation of the Monaco Palace, hidden in a secret compartment that Grace had built into her private study. Reading those letters, understanding the real reason Grace Kelly left Hollywood, changes everything about her story. This wasn't the tale of an actress who chose romance over career. This was the story of a woman who chose family over everything else she had ever wanted. Grace Kelly didn't find her fairy tale ending in Monaco. She found her prison, But it was a prison she chose, a sacrifice she made willingly to protect the people she loved most. The princess was real, but the fairy tale was the greatest performance of Grace Kelly's career, a role she played perfectly for 26 years, until the day she died. If this story moved you, share it with others who need to understand the real meaning of sacrifice. Hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments, would you have made the same choice Grace Kelly did? Don't miss our next video where we reveal another shocking truth about Grace Kelly's life, the real reason behind her mysterious car accident and the secret she took to her grave. Remember, the greatest love stories aren't always about romance. Sometimes they're about the love that makes you give up everything for the people who matter most. Grace Kelly's story is proof that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear crowns they never wanted,